on to our last debate. The head of the Prison Governors Association said this week that reducing prison overcrowding is essential and the morally right thing to do. Andrea Albert also says statistics on violence, suicide and self-harm are the worst they've ever seen. That damning assessment comes in the same week as a report by prison inspectors reveals that our jails are overcrowded, insanitary and degrading. So do prisoners deserve better conditions, or is the whole point that jails should be grim places fit for punishment? We're here to discuss that are Peter Dawson, Director of the Prison Reform Trust, Alexander Boot, a writer, Hardeep Matharu, a journalist, and Kevin Hogg, who works for the National Victims Association. Peter, if you're sent to prison, you've committed a crime. It's going to be hard. It's not meant to be pleasant, is it?
Well, no, absolutely, and it isn't. And the loss of liberty is the punishment. But people are sent to prison fundamentally because they haven't shown a respect for other people's lives, for their property, for their rights. If you want to teach that respect in prison, you have to show it. And overcrowded, insanitary conditions and enforced idleness, keeping people doing nothing for days and weeks at a time, makes it impossible to show that respect and therefore to teach it.
But there'll be people watching this who are victims of crime or family members have been victims of crime who will be saying, why should someone who's done something against me and broken the law be taught something in prison? It should be punishment.
Well, because they're coming out. Because all but a tiny minority of people in prison are coming out to live amongst us. And we want them to respect our laws and to be good citizens in the community. We have to teach that.
Kevin, we have to teach that. I mean, going to prison, the punishment should be the loss of freedom, surely. That's the key, isn't it?
Well, of course, yeah. Losing your liberty to pick up the phone and speaking with your family. I wasn't that fortunate to have that situation of speaking to my mum, but also looking at the other side of the fence.
Explain that.
My mum was murdered when I was 3. The person who killed my mum still had their freedom until an 800-year-old law was changed. When I turned 18, I ended up being sent into custody because of a crime that I committed. And my personal view is it's not all that bad. It could be a whole lot worse. Civil liberties are taken away. You still have your freedom, your life, and you can still have those family ties. But ultimately, I don't have that now.
Hardeep, we've all heard the stories. I mean, the story that Kevin's saying there, that it's actually not that bad. But we've heard the stories about satellite TV. They've all got PlayStations. They've actually got a pretty good life, sometimes better than the lives of people who are outside of jail.
I think it would be difficult to find anybody, really, that would say that prisoners are living in any sort of luxury or should.
We're not saying luxury, though, but a better life than someone who is in a very deprived condition in Britain.
I think the conditions in prisons are at a point that are quite appalling. The Chief Inspector of Prisons released a report this week publishing a number of really graphic photographs, actually, because I think the scale of the challenges that prisons are facing needs to be revealed. And I think there is an argument that prison needs to be more demanding, but perhaps in a different way. I don't think that harsher physical conditions and more overcrowded conditions are what is needed. But there is a question to be asked as to whether sitting for 20 hours a day in a cell watching TV is meaningful in any way for prisoners to address their behaviour and to be rehabilitated.
Alexander, would you want to sit in prison for 22 hours a day with a toilet in your room as well, not being allowed out?
Well, I certainly wouldn't like to be in prison at all, which is why I try not to commit crimes, successfully so far. But, overcrowding is a serious problem. But let's face it, even in theory, there are only three ways of reducing overcrowding in prisons. One is to have less crime, the other is to have more prisons, and the third is to let some criminals go free. And I think the only realistic way is the middle one of the three, to have more prisons.
But what about less crime? I mean, we heard from Peter there. If we have good rehabilitation, we'll have less criminals.
Ideally, I'm all for it. It would be a wonderful idea. I don't think it works, though. I think, we in the West have lost the concept of original sin, so we believe that everybody is naturally good. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
Could I jump in?
Very, very quickly.
Because there is a way of reducing prison numbers, which isn't letting people out. It's not necessarily about rehabilitation. It's how long we send people to prison for. And we send people to prison for much longer than we did even 10 years ago. And that's why our prison population outstrips the capacity that we've got to hold it.
Well, could it be?
Let's cross to Emma now, because she's got someone to talk to.
Yes. Joining me now is Nigel Hosking, who worked as a prison officer until early this year when he felt he could no longer continue in the job. Nigel, before you explain that to me, why did you go into it in the first place? Why did you join the prison service?
Good morning, Emma. I previously served 21 years. I was a paramedic with Hampshire Ambulance Service. I was then the team leader and coach working with young offenders, 18 to 24-year-old. This gave me an interest and an insight into some of the problems. So I joined the prison service in 2004, and I served 3 years working with juveniles and young offenders in Yorkshire, and then I transferred to HMP Winchester.
And how was the experience, and how did it change over time?
There's been a general deterioration. Can I just remind the rest of your speakers about the statement of purpose? And the statement of purpose is a national policy that means that the prison service should provide a safe and working environment both for prison officers and prisoners. And in 2015, 5 prisoners took their lives in a space of 4 months.
But those prisoners may have already been, we're not going to comment on those individual cases, of a different state of mind or a poor mental health, and that could be a whole other discussion about how you deal with that. I'm trying to understand from your viewpoint, what made you leave? Did conditions change that much?
Conditions severely changed. Probably, it was probably about the last 5 years or so. The expectations were unrealistic, the lack of investment. There were, I can't give you the dates, but the prison service, certainly locally, the IRC closed in Hasler, HMP Kingston closed, and HMYOY Reading closed. A number of prisons closed, and the next project the prison introduced was what they call VEDS, which was the Voluntary Exit Departure Scheme, which what we would know as redundancy. The prison service lost a huge amount of prison officers, the experienced staff. They lowered the benchmark along with the salary, and at the moment the investment is so very limited that the staff that they are encouraging into the service, they can recruit, but they cannot retain.
Nigel, thank you for painting a picture there, a picture of deterioration from his viewpoint.
Yeah, well, we'll put that point to Kevin. They're meant to be safe working environments, and in the last 5 years, Nigel says they're not.
A safe environment or not, it's a situation of what about safe environment for victims when they lose their liberty? A person potentially has lost their life. You know, all victims ever ask for is a level playing field. You know, prisons have various recreational badminton balls, for example, education. Victims of crime, they have to pay for education, they have to pay for a gym membership like you, I, or anyone else. Fundamentally, the taxpayers paying for this, and the taxpayers aren't really, well, the government are not investing enough into victim-led organisations or victims of crime. They say that they're at the heart of this criminal justice system, but quite simply, they are not.
Hardy, what about the point Alexander made earlier on, that some people are just bad and they will commit crimes whatever is given to them?
I think it depends how you see punishment and what we need that for. So, I mean, even the Justice Secretary, David Lidington, has said that people are sent to prison as punishment, you know, and they need to be places of reform and rehabilitation. What I think is really interesting is that there is somewhat of a contrasting narrative, and that's what we really need to be talking about. Do we want our prisons primarily to punish people and also keep them in conditions which are degrading and further that punishment, or do we want them to rehabilitate? Those two things are completely
But what about the people who can't be rehabilitated?
I think that prisoners they're not a homogenous group. So there's a vast difference between somebody maybe in a high security prison serving a very long-term sentence for a very serious offence and what might be appropriate around what can be done with them. And for example, a person serving maybe less than 6 months in a local prison for acquisitive crime that might be related to a drug dependency issue. You know, what that person needs will be different from what's appropriate for somebody else.
Let's see what people are saying at home, Emma.
Yes, lots of you getting in touch. Gavin says, They are in prison for crimes against the public, and compared to other prisons around the world, they're living in taxpayer-funded luxury. If they don't like the conditions, then do the time and never offend again. Sue says, I don't care about the conditions offenders have to live in. They can live in a rat-infested swamp for all I care. Criminals deserve to be treated like criminals, and maybe they then won't re-offend in the future. Christian says, though, if we want less re-offending, we need to look at countries like Norway that do prison reform right. Treat animals like animals, then they'll stay like them. And Ben says, but what about the rights of the victims of crime? Prisoners have it easy already, just something else society wishes to go soft on.
Yeah, what about the rights of the victim? Well, Peter, what will happen if conditions aren't improved in prisons in the next 5-10 years?
Well, we're already seeing what happens, and it's awful. Over 300 people didn't complete their prison sentences last year because they died, and over 100 of those took their own life.
But it's harsh. But what about the victims who say, well, they took a life?
But I'm hugely sympathetic to what Kevin's saying. I don't want to be spending money on people in prison when they could be paying their taxes. Most people are coming out of prison, and what we want is for them to hold down a job, to have somewhere to live, to pay their tax, to contribute, to put right what they've done. And that's the objective of the prison service. That's what the guy who's worked in prison was saying. The statement of purpose is a positive, constructive statement, and you can't do it if people are locked behind their cell door.
Okay, all of you, thank you very much indeed.